Okay, I think we are live and hello, pagans. And I want to give you a warm welcome. Welcome to another edition of Pagan Happy Hour. If you are new here, Pagan Happy Hour is something I do on Fridays. It is a great way for us fellow pagans and witches to chat, to connect, to share ideas and thoughts with each other. And I will, of course, be looking over here at the chat as we go along today. So I will be bringing in your thoughts and ideas as much as possible. And I do hope you brought a beverage with you today. We have a lovely show planned. Today, we will be talking about gardening and looking at it from a witchy or a pagan perspective. Thinking, how can we make our own gardening, our own plantings a bit more magical? So that's what we have in store for today. And there are, of course, two ways you can choose to support Pagan Happy Hour if you are interested. The first way is through my Patreon, which I have linked down below in the description box. And if you do choose to become a patron, you gain access to my exclusive Discord community, which is a great way to chat and share resources with fellow witches and pagans. And the other great way you can support the show is through the Super Chats feature, which is the $ button towards the bottom of the chat. And through that, you can donate any amount while we are live, and your comment or question will pop up really big for me. So I will be sure to bring in your thought and your idea into the conversation. And now that we got that out of the way, I would love y'all to tell me in the chat what you happen to be drinking this evening and where you are tuning in from. So let me cue that drink music and let's get started. Okay, I am just having a nice white wine this evening. Let me see where you all are from. Okay, it looks like we have people tuning in from England, let's see, from Maryland, Arizona, Louisiana, Illinois, the Bay Area, Minnesota, Fort Worth, Texas, Indiana, Colorado, Wyoming, Serbia, Colorado, New Jersey, Michigan, Scotland. It must be late there this time of evening. Let's see, we have Houston, Germany, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Belgium, Wales, California, West Virginia, Massachusetts, Los Angeles, New Zealand, and San Francisco. Well, cheers, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for this chat about witchy gardens. So let me turn off that drink music and we will get it started. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is why talk about this topic at all, or why a pagan garden? Why is this important at all? Of course, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this concept, but I think it's more important now than ever to be creating a garden, whether that be for food, for medicinal purposes, or just for beauty. And when I think about it, I tend to think that in our modern era, we spend so much time isolated on our screens that it's really easy to get disconnected from the natural world. Not only do we get disconnected from things like seasonality, but we also literally get disconnected from the dirt, right? We get disconnected from wildlife, from bugs, from birds, from spiders. And in approaching the concept of gardening, this is really an easy way to start to dip our toes back into the natural world in a way that is still very doable for our day-to-day lives. We can't all quit our jobs and run off into the woods and be hermits, but we can all grow a few plants. So I do think having a garden of whatever size is one of the most attainable and powerful ways we can start reconnecting to the natural world. And I think this is especially important for us pagans or witches because really at the foundation of our spiritual system is the natural world. So when we neglect that part of life, when we don't, dig our fingers into the soil, we aren't able to experience our spiritual path as intensely as we might like. And I find it interesting, especially here on YouTube, because since I've started to get into gardening, I've been watching a lot of YouTube content from fellow garden enthusiasts or homesteaders. And so many of them here on YouTube are Christian and actually talk a lot about their Christian faith in terms of gardening. And I don't think I found any other YouTubers actually in the garden or on the homestead talking about how their pagan faith informs their gardening or their connection to the natural world. So let's maybe change that up a bit. And I encourage you fellow pagans and witches to maybe share some content about what you are growing in your space to kind of level the playing field a bit. Because after all, us pagans and witches, we are primed for this kind of activity. It really hits at the heart of what our spirituality is based upon. We have our first super chat from Wednesday. Thank you very much. Mentioning in the chat that we are not buying or planting anything that we cannot consume or use medicinally, and that this is year 2. That's a really important part of gardening, is actually trying to use what you plant. And I've made the mistake here in my kind of year 1. I bought this house in December, so this is really my first year gardening in a home garden. Of course, I've done balcony gardening and indoor gardening previously, and I of course ran into that trap where I got over enthused and bought way too many seeds and just kind of went wild. So I definitely think that is a smart concept to keep in mind, to make sure when you do plant, you plant things that you're going to actually use or eat. Let me see what else you guys have to say about this topic. Let's see. Peach in the comments says, I like having my own space and being able to grow flowers for myself and to give to others. Yes, there is nothing more beautiful than not just receiving flowers, but being able to grow them yourself. Right now, here in my garden, I have quite a lot of hydrangeas that have been really lovely, and I've been enjoying cutting some of those hydrangea blossoms for the house. Let's see. Oh, a good comment here from Kalia that says, don't forget to ferment your foods so you get the minerals and bacteria for your gut biome. They're learning more and more about the importance of the gut biome, and fermentation is really great for that. I do a couple things in, my own routine in that endeavor. I, like many others, kind of got on that sourdough bandwagon at the start of the pandemic, and I'm still doing it. So I try to make my own sourdough bread regularly. And another thing I started about 3 months ago is kombucha. So I always have kombucha on hand as well. And then I also tend to make kimchi because I really like it. But yes, great point. Fermentation is another great way to get all those beneficial nutrients into our system and our gut biome. Let's see. What else do you guys have to say? Nicole mentions that I'm in transition right now and don't have my own home, and it's been hard not having a garden of any sort. Yes, I can definitely relate to that. And one of the things I wanted to go over is, what do you do when you don't have the physical space of a garden? Because that had been my life for my entire adulthood until last December when I bought this house. And I don't even have that much garden space. I just have kind of little strips on the side, front and back, but I'm really going to be working hard to utilize them. But that's a lot more than I had previously. As last year I was in Dallas, and then the 6 years before that I was living in Chicago. So I totally relate to many of your struggles that might be living in cities, in small apartments. I lived in some really small apartments. And I do have some suggestions for you all if you are interested in pursuing this, even though you live in the city. The easiest thing you can probably do if you are just starting out and don't have any physical garden space is growing herbs on a windowsill. Obviously, herbs are great for culinary purposes, especially with how expensive they are to buy in the grocery store. It's really great to be able to grow your own basil and thyme and rosemary, things like that. And on top of that, a lot of those same culinary herbs also have medicinal purposes, and they also often have magical purposes as well. So you can pick and choose your herbs carefully, where you can use them both culinarily or spiritually or both. So even if you just have a windowsill, that can be a great starting point. Of course, if you have a balcony, even better, you can grow a little bit more. There's a lot of great YouTube content actually about gardening in small spaces and gardening on small inner city balconies. I do have a book about this specifically that I got a couple years ago. It's called Indoor Edible Garden, and this is what it says it is. How to grow fruits and vegetables, and you would be surprised how much. There's really a lot of opportunity there, even if you live in a small inner city apartment. And then on top of that, there's some other things you can do, some of which border on a gray area legally. Some things I like to consider are guerrilla gardening. I don't know if you've ever heard the term before. But when I was in Chicago, I definitely had some friends that really participated in this. And you do have to be careful about this, but basically in the city, you have a lot of green spaces. Often it's just like in between the sidewalk and the road, you might have a little green patch there. And most likely no one's going to stop you if you put a few seeds in that spot. So I've definitely gotten away with that in the past. Another form of guerrilla gardening that you can do in the inner city is seed bombs, which is where you can take like clay or paper matter, condense it, and put seeds inside of it. And then you can throw it into abandoned lots that are unsightly. And you can put like wildflower seeds, for example. So when you pass by that abandoned lot, you might start to see some beautiful flowers growing, which will, of course, help the local ecosystem and pollinators. So guerrilla gardening can be a fun thing to do if you want to take a bit of a punk approach to your city life. And of course, in a simple way too, just taking walks throughout your environment can be a great way to foster knowledge of the natural world, which will, of course, help you connect more spiritually too. Identifying the plants and trees in your local area. There's a lot of good apps that you can use for that. I use an app called Picture This. where you can like take a picture and then it will tell you what plant or tree you're looking at. So taking the time to just start by identifying what is naturally growing in your area can be a really good way to kickstart your research here. And for me personally, just moving to the South, I grew up in upstate New York, so I've only been familiar with colder climates. This is my first time really gardening or living in the South. So I've had a lot to learn when it comes to new plants and trees. So that's been a fun journey as I just kind of work through figuring out what is actually growing here in my local environment. Um, Let's see. Oh, we have a super chat here from Christopher. Thank you very much. That says, I'm new to Tennessee and dealing with way more insects than I used to. I discovered that many witchy plants repel insects such as lavender, rosemary, basil, and mint, and that I like to place them near doors, windows, and balconies. Yes, that's a good point and a great idea, especially something I should start doing more of because here in Georgia, we have some very large and scary bugs. So, yes, there are definitely plants you can use to help reduce that bug pressure. So, let me see what else you all have to say here. DACA has a super chat. Thank you very much. Mentioning, I took package mint and managed to resurrect it. Now I proudly grow it on my balcony. Oh, that's lovely. And such a great way to kind of use up something you can get from the grocery store and make it produce continuously. Awesome. Let's see. What else do we have going on? Okay. Sarah in the comments is mentioning my neighbors have some magical trees that I collect from sometimes. Only what has fallen or the tree has given up. Yeah, you can definitely do that. When I was in Chicago, I would often go to the public parks and pick up evergreen branches that had fallen around Yule time so I could craft my own natural decor and holiday items. So I've done that before. Okay, and then, a super chat from Wednesday here that says the mosquito is the Georgia state bird. Oh, ain't that the truth? I have, at any given time, 10 to 20 mosquito bites on me. They just love me. So, yes, definitely something I'm struggling with, especially this time of year. But it's not preventing me from getting out there and gardening. But what I do have to do is I have to wear pants and a long sleeve shirt to go out and garden. There's no shorts and t-shirt for me because if I do that, the mosquitoes will just cover me. But even in those challenges, we got to persevere, right? So we talked a bit about why garden in the first place. What does that have to do with our spiritual system? Another thing I did want to add to that is the wheel of the year in general and the concept of seasonality, which is pretty core to pagan or witchy beliefs. We want to have a good understanding, not just of the moon cycles, but the solar cycle as well. We need to know when things are blooming, when things are harvesting, because when we think about ancient pagan holidays, they were primarily based around the agricultural calendar. So by doing a garden, by growing your own food or herbs, it helps you get more intimately connected to the seasonal cycle. And one of the biggest differences between paganism and monotheistic religions is in paganism, we tend to view really important concepts in life through the lens of the wheel or the cycle, right? Instead of a linear trajectory, like you often see in Christianity or Judaism, like you are born, you live, you die, you go to heaven. In paganism, we tend to look at things much more cyclically. Of course, you can look at life in that way, life, death, and rebirth. But the idea is that human cycle mirroring the life cycle of the natural world, the world of plants, right? And really noticing how the intricate nature of the ecology of the environment helps facilitate that cycle by looking at things like fungi, for example, or the mycelium network as a way to help us understand how everything is intimately connected to each other and has an intelligence that we may not quite yet understand. So, as pagans, it's really important for us to connect to the idea of the cycle, and to look at not just our lives, but the planet as a whole and its ecology through that lens of an interconnected web that cycles. So, growing your own things actually helps you see that in reality, because we may understand that from a conceptual or a spiritual viewpoint, but when you see it physically, that's pretty powerful. And that's one of the cool things about paganism, versus other monotheistic religions that might be based on the concept of miracles, where you just have to believe or have faith in these, miracles that were written down a couple thousand years ago. In paganism, we don't need to do that. And we can also see our beliefs tangibly here in the natural world as we scientifically observe them. Because the natural world does move in a cyclical fashion, in a web of intelligence, and we can observe that. So that's what's kind of cool, I think, about our religion, is we actually have a lot of things we can physically touch and look at to tell us our lessons about our faith. We don't have to read a book and have faith in miracles. We can actually see and touch what's important to our faith. So that's just something I wanted to mention, as one of the reasons why I think this is beneficial for any witch or pagan, anyone following this spiritual path. Let me see here. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is ways to kind of make your garden a bit more witchy or a bit more pagan. And I have quite a few thoughts and ideas here. And of course, I'm excited to learn yours as well. So, the first thing you can do with a garden space is to actually use that space in your spiritual life. A lot of times, if you ever attend certain rituals in a local new age shop, for example, or in a local coven, in my experience, a lot of times they've occurred indoors. There's this phrase called living room Wiccan or living room pagan, meaning you push the couch and the chairs to the side of the room and you make a circle, and then you do a little ritual there. But that's probably not going to be as impactful or as historically resonant as if you were to have done a ritual outside. So, one of the best things to do with your garden is to actually create a little space there where you can perform any type of magical working or ritual. You can do something fairly mundane. Maybe you just use that space as a meditation spot to kind of sit beneath the tree, focus on your visualization techniques. Maybe you bring some runes or a tarot deck out there and do your divination outside in the natural world. Or maybe you do a little bit more. A lot of people like to create outdoor altars. You can do this with if you have a tree stump, that can be a great surface for an outdoor altar. Or, you can just bring, an outdoor furniture item to use as a little altar outside, whatever table you might be able to find. Oh, we have a super chat from Jakara here with an interesting idea that says, our neighbor planted a whole large geode in her front yard as an ode to the nature spirits. Yeah, that's a great idea too. You know, crystals can actually be put back outside if you want, especially if you do have a little bit of an altar space. So really thinking about your garden space, not just as something to look pretty, but as a working area for your faith. Another thing you can do is, if you do have the space, to create a fire pit, which are fun regardless. I mean, who doesn't love a fire pit? But historically, fire pits were the centerpiece of pagan ritual. If you go back and look at any of my other videos about Beltane, or really pretty much any pagan holiday, even Lughnasadh, which we have coming up, the vast majority of them were based around a fire. So if you do have the space and are able to create a fire pit, that is probably one of the best places to perform any magical working. Not only does it allow you to connect with obviously the powerful element of fire, the transformational aspect of that element, but it also connects you to our pagan ancestors who, since the origin of the human species, have been performing magical rites around the flames. So the fire and the fireplace, or the fire pit, is one of the things that really is this kind of unbroken line between our ancient ancestors and today. We talk a lot about how it's unfortunate that we don't have an unbroken line in most forms of paganism. We've lost so much when it comes to specific information and written materials on how our ancient ancestors practiced their faith. But we do know that fire was key, and that it has been really important to pagan practice for millennia, and really since caveman times, if we're if we're thinking about it, right? I'm even thinking of like the Lascaux caves that were drawn with animals and shamans that would have been lit by firelight, you know? So this is really hits at something core to the universal human religious experience. And having a fire pit is one of the best ways you can experience that. So, really thinking about your outdoor space as a location for your pagan or witchy practices is going to help shift your mindset, I think, a bit. And even better if you have like a fence or a little space from the neighbors so they won't know what you're up to. But even if they see, who cares, right? So, another thing I wanted to mention is herbalism. Now, when we think about witches specifically, what was the role of the witch from a historical perspective? So, the vast majority of what we know about witches, or the symbolism associated with witches, as in broomstick, black cat, old woman with the crooked nose, all of that, for the most part, comes from a specific time period in a specific place. We're talking early modern era in Britain, right? Like these stereotypes all come from a world which is fully Christianized. Of course, there were magical practitioners before the Christianization of Europe. You can check out some of my previous videos on like Norse magic and theater. But a lot of what we think of when we think of the witch is those stereotypical representations. But what were they in reality? So what were these women doing in the early modern era in Britain, where all of these stereotypes come from? Well, for the most part, they were herbalists, and they were living in the edge of town. and they were providing assistance and remedies for the village. And they probably had a very intimate connection to plants. They were the people that you would go to when you had a problem. Of course, you also had the cunning man. Now, the cunning man would also do this service, and realistically, most people back in the day would go to him, which unfortunately was usually a man, instead of the woman at the edge of town. But she still had a role, especially when it came to midwifery, childbirth, contraception, things like that. Like, she was the one to go to for that kind of stuff. So while we love our Hollywood depictions of witches with their magical spells and all of that kind of stuff, yes, some of that did happen, of course, to various degrees of effectiveness. But the vast majority of the role of the witch, where most of our understanding of her comes from, is due to her role as an herbalist, as one who understood the natural world and the plants within it and would be able to dispense them for both physical and spiritual needs. So when we think about how do we tap back into that as modern witches, really we need to think about ourselves as modern day herbalists. And having a garden is a great way to start to tap back into that ancient role. Now, that doesn't mean to disregard modern Western medicine. We should not do that at all. There's a lot of great things modern medicine has given us. But that doesn't need to be the be-all, end-all of everything we use to help sustain ourselves for the future. So looking into herbalism, not just from a medical perspective, but also from a culinary perspective and from a spiritual perspective in terms of correspondences for certain plants. Now, when you look at magical correspondences for certain herbs, 9 times out of 10, the magical correspondence is probably based on the historic medicinal purpose of that herb, which makes a lot of sense, right? When you think about it, if you ever find like a list of magical correspondences and it doesn't line up in any way with the traditional herbal remedies that herb was used for, it's probably made up, right? Because you started with the medicinal correspondence first, and then magical aspects kind of layered onto that. So herbs are wonderful for many reasons. One of the fun reasons is that bugs tend to leave them alone, at least compared to other vegetables or flowers. They have a better rate of staying alive if you are new to gardening. They are good from a culinary perspective. Of course, we know our classics, basil, thyme, oregano, rosemary, all of that. So many good herbs to use for that. Some of them have great medicinal purposes. And then on top of that, they have great magical purposes too. A couple books I wanted to share with you. This is one I picked up a couple months ago. This is the New American Herbal. This is a great compendium of different herbs. It tells you their name, how to grow it, what it's used for, culinary, medicinally. Obviously, this book would probably be more beneficial for my fellow Americans watching, though I'm sure they probably have similar books for Europeans or anyone else watching. But this has been really fun, and it even has recipes. Like, I found this the other day. Here's how to make homemade absinthe using your own wormwood leaves. So if you want to get super witchy. So this is a really good resource to have. I've started dog-earing some pages of different herbs that I want to be growing in my own garden. And then if you want to get started with medicinal herbalism, I highly recommend this book. This was recommended to me from one of the girls in my Discord community. This is Rosemary Gladstar's Medicinal Herbs, and this has 36 herbs, often ones that are really easy to find. And it shows you how to grow these herbs, how to create tinctures, how to create salves, how to use them in a variety of ways, and what their medicinal uses are. So this has been really fun. And of course, with things like this, you want to look at what you are currently struggling with and look up herbs that can assist you with those issues to plant. Some of these even you can like forage as well if you don't want to grow everything. So some things I'm definitely planning on growing out of this is calendula, since I have a lot of skin issues myself. But there's so many great things in here to try out growing, and it's very much a beginner's guide. There's only 36 herbs in here, and most of them also are dual purpose, as in you can use them in a culinary aspect as well. So I highly recommend trying your hand at a bit of herbalism, not to mention a cabinet in your kitchen filled with tinctures and various mason jars filled with little herbs and drying herbs hanging from your pantry is just really witchy in general, as in terms of an aesthetic. But don't just make it an aesthetic. Actually use what you are growing. Use those tinctures, use those poultices to actually improve your life and the life of others that you care about in your family and your community. So I am really excited about diving into some of these traditional witchy herbs and using them for a variety of purposes. So that's something that I think is a really great place to start at. Just start with herbalism. That really was the traditional role of the witch in society, if you want to look at her from a historical perspective. And it's a great way we can tap into that ancestral lineage, and also a great fun thing to do, right? Let me see. What else do you guys have to say here? Okay, just checking your comments now. Oh, Gigi is asking about that app to use to identify plants. I use an app called Picture This, but there are plenty of different apps on the App Store, so I recommend that. You can also buy these really like cheap guides to your local area. So just pick out whatever state you know you live in, and just you can find a book that can help you too. Let's see. Oh, this is an esoteric question. Thomas is asking, what are your thoughts on blue lotus? So I'm guessing you are talking about the Egyptian blue lotus that you see often in ancient Egyptian artwork. There is a theory that the ancient Egyptians imbibed the blue lotus flower as a hallucinogenic, and that it probably had a big impact on their faith. Probably. I'm a believer in that. I've talked a lot about the Amantia muscara mushroom in terms of its psychedelic properties and how that influenced both different pagan sects as well as early Christianity. So I have videos on that. If you want to go down some weird rabbit holes, I highly recommend. Lynn has another app recommendation called iNaturalist. Madison is mentioning Scott Cunningham's book, The Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs. That is a great one. Scott Cunningham is, of course, one of the I would say one of the best authors of witchy books. His book on Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner, really started me down this path. And even though I'm no longer Wiccan, the way he phrases and talks about the pagan mindset and the pagan perspective on the world, I find just really great. It's a really wonderful beginner book. Let's see. Phelan is mentioning, I'm interested in growing hexing herbs and making flying ointment. So there is a witch, I think her name is Sarah Lawson. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but she does make her own flying ointments and sells them online. If you are unaware, I talked a bit about flying ointments in my video on journeying. Flying ointments is a salve, like a lotion, that you would make out of some traditional, slightly hallucinogenic herbs. It is kind of dangerous, so I do not recommend this at all for the beginner witch. You want to work with a herbalist who knows what they're doing. But yes, you can buy those online. But be careful. I'm not condoning it because I don't want to get in trouble, but I've done that before. Let's see, but growing your own could be fun. Obviously, you have to be very careful. Like, don't grow belladonna. Like, that is not going to end well. I'll just say that. Oh, it's Sarah Lawless. Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Highly recommend looking her up. I think she lives in Canada, and I think she does do workshops, herbalism workshops up there. She's into traditional witchcraft, which is something I've talked a lot about on my channel before, the differences between traditional witchcraft and Wicca. Let's see. Okay, awesome. So another thing I wanted to mention is thinking about growing some plants or even flowers or trees that you can actually use as decor items or decorating items for the pagan holidays. So one of the things I've talked a lot about and I've shared a lot with you is my love of using natural items to decorate for different pagan holidays. Mainly the traditional 8 sabbats or points on the wheel of the year. Now, I know, of course, you can buy like fake stuff, and if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But I've had a lot of fun, even within the constraints of the years when I've lived in cities, trying to do my best at using natural materials and natural things that are growing during that point of that season and that holiday. So one of the really fun things I discovered when moving into this house, in the front fence, I actually have a series of holly bushes. So I'm going to have some natural holly that I can clip to create my own holly garlands for Yule. And I live in Savannah, which, if you're not aware, probably has the most beautiful oak trees in the world. It's a species of oak called southern live oaks. They're just covered in Spanish moss. They're very romantic looking. My house is surrounded by them, and the entire city is. So having both an excess of oak and holly to create garlands for Yule really hits nicely with that symbolism, especially when we look at the metaphor and the folklore of the Holly King and the Oak King as the wheel turns. Having holly and oak together in a Yuletide garland really appeals to me. So I cannot wait to work on setting that up for next Yule. So there are plenty of other things you can grow if you want to have items for each Sabbat. If you live in a bit of a more northern climate, you might want to think about planting some snowdrops, as those are a flower that blooms at about the time of Imbolc. They're one of the first spring flowers that even poke through the snow. So having a vase of snowdrops on Imbolc for an Imbolc ritual would just be very lovely. I don't think they would grow here. I think it's too hot. But I could take that similar lesson, like here in early spring around Imbolc, we have camellias blooming. So I could take a few camellia flowers and use those as representation for the start of spring. So thinking about the different pagan holidays, what could you grow that could be representative of that holiday, where you could use that both in maybe your culinary world, but also in a decorating sense? Like, another thing that of course comes to mind is autumn equinox and apples. I don't really have the space for an apple tree. If I did, I would definitely have one. But having an apple tree and then being able to harvest apples for the autumn equinox and using that in a ritual way, in a divination way. Apple divination is kind of a big deal for that holiday. Or just, using that apple to make hard cider, which is something traditionally that's been done by pagans for thousands of years, would be really cool. So there's a lot you can actually plant with thinking about the Sabbats and the holidays, in trying to figure out how can I make these holidays a little extra special. So I wanted to just mention that there's so much you can do just from a decor perspective, even if you're not super into like growing herbs or vegetables. Oh, and I see in the comments Shakara mentioning pumpkins. Of course, pumpkins for Samhain, right? I probably won't be able to grow pumpkins this year because I'm not on top of it. My garden's a little bit chaotic right now. I should probably do a garden tour soon. But next year, I want to grow pumpkins if I can. I don't even know if I can here in Georgia. I'm in zone 8B, so we'll see. But the idea of having your own homegrown pumpkins to make your own jack-o'-lanterns for Samhain is just like peak paganism perfection, right? That sounds so fun. Or even, back to the idea of apple trees, singing to the plants is something, or to the trees is something that you find around that point in between late autumn and early winter. Wassailing. I have a few videos on wassailing, which is kind of a hilarious and fascinating tradition. Usually we think about it in more of a winter Yule type activity, but it's kind of really an activity for that in-between time of after Samhain and before Yule. So a lot of fun things you can do for that. Now, I got to talk quickly because I have a few other points here, and we're almost at the end of the hour. But another thing I wanted to mention that you can do is you can plant certain plants or garden areas based on specific deities. So there are certain plants that are associated with certain deities, and you can, of course, look these up online. So, for example, say you are really connected to Venus or Aphrodite. She has certain plants that are associated with her, such as bergamot or orchids, motherwort, roses, or lady's mantle. So you could take a little garden bed and make it your Venusian garden bed and plant things that are associated specifically with her. Now, you could then use those flowers as offerings to her in any type of ritual. Or you could put in a little extra effort and tie your planting and harvesting to Venusian days and times. So let me explain what I mean. So if we're looking at the Greco-Roman gods, because this is mostly based on a Greco-Roman system, you can, of course, do this for other deities as well and other pantheons. But Venus is associated with Friday. Or if you're looking from a Norse pantheon, say you want to do something with Odin, plant a Odin garden bed. That would be Wednesday. So say, going back to this Venus garden bed, planting those plants on a Friday, or harvesting on a Friday, or cutting the flowers on her day. So you're kind of adding in this extra level. Now, if you want to be super extra, like extra, you can look into planetary hours. So I recommend looking this up if you've never heard of planetary hours before. But they're based on an ancient astrological system called the Chaldean order of the planets. It's spelled Chaldean, so I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. But this has the planets in a certain sequence, and this sequence is tied towards hours of the day. So the sequence, it goes, I think, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, and then it keeps repeating. So each day of the week is named for a certain planet. Like we mentioned, Venus's day is Wednesday. Mercury's day is Venus's day is Friday. Mercury's day is Wednesday. Moon, Monday. Sun, Sunday. You get it. But the ruling planet of that day also rules the sunrise hour. So this type of timekeeping is based on sunrise, sunset, not on our traditional 24-hour, cycle. So how it works is if you are looking at Venus or Friday, look at the sunrise hour on that Friday that you're looking to plant. So it would start, Venus hour would be the first hour of sunrise, the next hour would be Jupiter, then Mars, and then probably say about 2 p.m. it would cycle through and it'd be like Venus hour again. You could plant or harvest at that exact hour on the day of Venus, of a plant associated with her, to give an offering to her, or just to, decorate with a beautiful flower, or to, for any reason. But there are so many levels of nerdiness you can go with this when you look at planetary days and hours, or certain herbs and plants associated with certain deities, that you can really have a lot of fun with it if that's your thing. So I just wanted to mention that in case anyone wants to go down a internet rabbit hole of looking up different plants associated with different deities and their planetary day and hour. So yes, it gets intense. Now, 2 other types of gardens I wanted to mention before we end Pagan Happy Hour. The first is a moon garden. So this is a garden that is based on plants that would still be in bloom at night, right? So you could go out into your garden on the full moon, or really any stage of the lunar cycle, and you would actually see flowers in bloom. Now, usually a moon garden works with flowers that are white or silvery, so have this kind of lunar essence to them. So if you want to create a small patch of your garden to become a moon garden, this is definitely something you can do, and something really fun. There are certain plants, there are, I think, like 10 to 20 plants that are pretty commonly used for these moon gardens. Some of them are Queen of the Night, Snow and Summer, White Cosmos, Night Blooming Jasmine, and of course, the moonflower. So if you were doing an sabbat or a full moon celebration, having a little bit of a moon garden going on could be a great place to do that ritual. So that could be a fun idea too, if you are interested in it. Let's see. Oh, we have a super chat from Dhaka that gives us a little bit more context here on the planetary hours, mentioning that system uses 12 hours of different length. You divide the time from sunrise to sunset, and that's how long the hour lasts. Yes, planetary hours is a bit complex. So it's really great for anyone who's also really interested in astrology, or anyone who might want to work within the Greco-Roman pantheons, because planetary hours are based on kind of this Greco-Roman system. But it can still be fun to just kind of dabble in. Things like alchemy too, which was a topic on the poll that didn't get chosen this week. Alchemy is also a lot of the time based on planetary hours, or doing certain tasks and activities at certain times of the astrological calendar and day. So yeah, maybe we'll hit up alchemy for a future Pagan Happy Hour, because I know a lot of you all have been curious about that. So the last type of garden I wanted to mention that could be fun to try out is a fairy garden. Fairy gardens aren't necessarily traditional. It's more of just like a fun thing to do. But a fairy garden is usually some type of storytelling scene that you kind of create in your garden. It usually includes some small plants and structures. You might have like a birdhouse or a fairy door on a tree. You might have little figurines of fairies or little animals. So you're kind of creating this little scene in a tiny little pocket of your garden as a way to kind of just invite that fairy magic into your space. Now, if you've watched some of my previous pagan happy hours and content on the Fae in particular, you'll know that the Fae are not these small little fairies that we like to imagine them to be today. Um, they are much more intense than that. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do a fairy garden if that's something you want to do. It can still be fun. And because we've lost so much in terms of written material, we really don't have much at all. We have some things, but we know very little about the Irish pagan magical system, for example. We rely on folklore for a lot of that. So even our modern folklore of the Fae, even though it's quite a bit different than how the Fae were understood during pagan times, it can still be a great way to connect with them because there is always still a lot of wisdom and knowledge and history in looking at folklore. So creating a fairy garden can be something fun to do. And I just think they're adorable anytime I see one. So creating a fairy garden or a moon garden, or just, it doesn't have to be your whole garden, just a little patch, a little area, can be a easy and fun way to make your space a little bit more magical. Let's see. Julie in the comments says, she mentions at a Renaissance fair I went to, they had a fairy garden in a spiral and children got to decorate their own flowers and plant it into the ground. Yes, I've seen fairy gardens too at Ren fairs. I'm actually going to a Ren fair next week. I'll be traveling to upstate New York where I grew up. I'll be hitting up the Sterling Ren Fair. I love the Ren Fair. But fairy gardens are, of course, a great thing to do too if you have kids. If you want to start introducing paganism to your kids, creating a fairy garden or a little fairy door and painting that, or painting a little birdhouse and making that into kind of like a fairy house. These are great activities to start to introduce your children to pagan concepts and pagan folklore. Or even a moon garden. That could be a really fun thing to do with kids. Really, any gardening is fun to do with kids. I think I don't have any of my own, but I know a lot of you all are parents and are looking for fun ways to introduce your kids to paganism. So there we go. That is what I wanted to cover today. Of course, this topic could go on and on and on. There are so many topics we could go down rabbit holes in terms of gardening from a pagan and a witchy perspective. But I want to thank you all so much for joining me for Pagan Happy Hour today. So next Friday, I won't be in town, so I won't be able to do a Pagan Happy Hour then, but I think I can do one the following week. So stay tuned for that. I'll, of course, put a poll up on my YouTube community page so you all can choose the topic. And be sure to check out, I have some links down below on additional garden content and content about land spirits that I've created in the past. So you can check that out in the description box if you're interested. And I want to wish you all a lovely Friday. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. And I'll see you later. Bye.